Hello and welcome to the Music Professor channel. I'm Matthew King and I'm here with my able assistant Loki. He's in his bed and he'll probably not be saying a great deal. But we are today going to be talking about, boring pieces of music. And it's a reaction to a subreddit, a sort of slightly geeky subreddit where people are flagging up various bits of boring classical music. And the first question is any really a significant piece of classical music, in other words, the literature of music, can it be boring? It's a bit like saying, oh, Middlemarch is boring, but Pride and Prejudice isn't, or, yeah, fine, okay. Well, let's see. Let's see whether we are finding boring pieces here. So, looking through. Oh, well, the first thing that comes up is that Chopin wrote a fugue. Now, I have to admit that I don't know this, so I'm going to look it up. I'm actually looking at a YouTube page and sort of reading off it. Now, this looks like a counterpoint exercise. It's probably something that Chopin did when he was about 15. He's a very brilliant teenager. It's quite difficult to read this. It's a long subject, ostensibly in A minor, but most of it is in E minor. Answer. Yeah, and so it goes on. Well, it's not really Chopin, is it? Or, I mean, it's an exercise, for goodness sake. Surely we can cut him some slack. He'd never intended that to be published, did he? I mean, they're right. It's not the most thrilling piece, is it? But, you know, how many people would want their teenage exercises to be shown to the world and examined closely? So we'll let Chopin off the hook there. It's okay. It's an all right student fugue. Right, there's a legitimate viola sonata by Mendelssohn. God, really? Is there? Let's have a look at that. So, Mendelssohn, I've never seen this before. So again, is this an early piece? I suspect it is. Mendelssohn was the most brilliant composer ever. I mean, much more brilliant than Mozart as a teenager. He was completely incredible. And he published a whole bunch of masterpieces. I mean, at the age of 16, he was writing the octet. Unbelievable masterpiece at 16. So Mendelssohn, we're talking about somebody incredible, really. So this is piano on its own, C minor. It's very much in a kind of Beethoven style. Oh, nice. Da 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 da. Nice shift to A flat. Oh, this isn't boring. Back to the dominant, viola comes in, da 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 da. That's just like Beethoven. That's just like Beethoven's Fifth. Do you remember the amazing moment in the recap of Beethoven's Fifth when it goes ba 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 ba, and the oboe goes da 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 da, like this amazing lonely voice from the back of the orchestra. Fantastic moment. Mendelssohn's nicked that. Just looking at that tiny bit, it looks fascinating, and all the more fascinating because it's clearly very, very young Mendelssohn imitating Beethoven. And incidentally, when young Mendelssohn imitated Beethoven, he didn't do it like somebody who couldn't imitate Beethoven. Do you know, he actually imitated the late quartets when he was 18, when he wrote his A minor quartet. And the astonishing thing is, no one at that time was imitating late Beethoven. Everyone thought that Beethoven had gone mad. So late Beethoven was absolutely a no-go area. But Mendelssohn goes, oh, you know what I'm going to check out? Beethoven's new quartet. He gets hold of them and then he writes his own. And his own A minor quartet, which he wrote when he was 18, is, and I kid you not, as good as Beethoven's Opus 132. It's unbelievable. I mean, it's a miracle. So, the greatest teenage composer in history, greatest teenage musician, possibly. No, well, there was Stevie Wonder, wasn't there? But he was amazing. Mendelssohn was fabulous. So astonishing achievements for a teenager. Okay, I'm going to go on down. So we've got dull fugues by Mendelssohn. They're not that dull. Actually, they're rather good. Satie's Vexations is mentioned. Well, check out our channel because we've released an entire video with a complete performance of Satie's Vexations. Is it boring? It's debatable. In some sense, I think Satie wanted to create a kind of boring atmosphere, almost like a spiritual state. You get something similar with the more contemporary minimalist movement, that you get lulled into a kind of state, and in that state your ears get open to a sort of new kind of experience. I don't think it's boring, I think it's challenging. Check out our video, it's really good. And it's not only a good video, it's not only a good performance of Vexations, quite a quick performance of Vexations, and therefore, in a way, more listenable to than most. It's also got a whole kind of biography of Satie and other musicians who knew Satie, so it's a great little film. Needs to be more popular. Right, Ravel's Bolero, oh no, Ravel's Bolero, I mean, what an amazing piece. Someone's written, please God, never let me perform this again. And a trombonist has chipped in and said, as a trombonist, I've got to listen to the trombonist now. Who could hit the high D flat and glissando down 2 octaves? I was grateful. Oh, I see what they're saying. As a trombonist, he's bigging himself up. As a trombonist who could hit the high D flat and glissando down 2 octaves, I was grateful to have something to do for a change that wasn't freaking Wagner. Yeah, I think they're standing up for Ravel there. Yeah, Ravel's Bolero. Do you know, Ravel's Bolero is a total masterpiece. He called it a piece without music, which is a sort of joke, but he was always very disparaging about Bolero because he viewed it as an experiment, and it is really. And the experiment is, what do you do when you simply rotate a melody, a very, very long melody? Well, there are 2 melodies really. There's one that's the famous C major. Have you ever noticed how Andrew Lloyd Webber ripped that off horribly, didn't he? Isn't it Memories? Na, 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 na. Outrageous. He ought to be sued. Anyway, Bolero is much better. And it's da 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 da, and you've got that dum da da dum da da dum rhythm. And then the second melody is much more sort of like a Moorish Arabic. Oh, it's also slightly bluesy. So you've got the kind of day melody and a night melody, and the rhythms pulsing away underneath. And then gradually Ravel just repeats and repeats, and there's no variation. The melodies circle, a bit like Vexations. I wonder if he thought of that. I wonder if he's inspired by Vexations because he loved Satie and they were good mates at one time. Bit like Vexations. Anyway, Ravel doesn't do it like Satie. He does this amazing thing with the orchestra. I mean, you will know this, but the orchestra, he adds more and more of the orchestra in a very subtle way. And the whole sense of the thing is cumulative, and there's this enormous sense of crescendo entirely created through the orchestration. So it's an orchestral masterpiece, just in terms of studying that score and seeing how he handles the orchestral. The weight of the orchestra and the colour of the orchestra is absolutely fabulous, not boring at all. Okay, chiming in says my shadow is stuck. Chiming in with my 2 cents in favour of Leningrad. Now, I think he's talking about Shostakovich's 7th Symphony, the Leningrad Symphony, which was first performed during the siege of Leningrad, and astonishingly was sort of broadcast through loudspeakers at the German soldiers. You know, in other words, the enemy had to hear this sort of act of defiance.
I'll just make a point. They're responding to the original post.
Good point, Ian. Yeah. So this, I think, is a reference to the original comment, which I have to admit I'd sort of forgotten about. But the original question is, what's the most boring piece of music for you? For me, it's Shostakovich's Leningrad Symphony, number 7. It's boring and absolutely overrated, and it sucks. Well, you know, don't sit on the fence about the Leningrad Symphony. I don't think it's a piece you can sit on the fence about, is it? Now, look, I've said that stuff about the first performance. So the other thing about the first performance is that the performers were ill and malnourished, and sort of some of them were virtually dying of starvation. So it's a symphony that has all of that behind it, and I think one has to bear these things in mind. Any artwork has to be viewed in the context, I think, of why it was written and the circumstances. Viewed objectively, it may not be Shostakovich's greatest symphony, but actually I think it's rather good. And the first movement does something a little bit like Bolero. It repeats and repeats this strange, perky little tune. Da ba bum bum, sort of expanding tune. Da 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 da. That little passage, that sequence, was parodied absolutely brilliantly by Bartok in his Concerto for Orchestra. Fantastic passage where the whole orchestra seems to be laughing at it. So, so these criticisms about Shostakovich being boring were even being voiced in the 1940s by other composers. Bartok was mightily pissed off by the success of the Leningrad Symphony. One gets the impression. Is it boring? No. I think you should listen to it in context. That tune, I think, represents, as far as I understand it, the march of fascism. It grows and grows. It's a sort of banal 8-bar. It's a banal square melody that goes on in its sort of perky endlessness, marching forward. And the orchestra grows and grows and becomes more and more terrifyingly noisy and banal. It's deliberately banal and monstrous. And that is clearly a statement about what was confronting the city of Leningrad, the onslaught of the Russians. It's interesting, the onslaught of the Germans, of the Nazis. It's interesting that he doesn't represent the Nazis with a sort of some kind of trope of villainy. They're represented by something banal and sort of perky. It's quite weird. It's quite sarcastic, I suppose. Right, let's go on to the next one. Someone's put the Lark Ascending. Insofar as, and I think I talked about this in a recent video about the Classic FM Hall of Fame, where I think the Lark Ascending is number 2 in the list. Well, it's not his best piece, is it? It's very pretty, though. I don't find it particularly boring. It starts with those wonderful chords. There's something absolutely magical, I think, about the opening with these beautiful parallel chords over an E minor, over an E pedal. It sort of ushers in something dreamlike and sort of quintessentially English pastoral, and then you got the violin sort of beginning its solo. So yeah, poetic and fragile and extremely evocative. You can completely understand why it's so popular. May not be his greatest piece, but it's rather beautiful. Right, let's look at almost anything. Almost anything written by Haydn. That's pretty mean. Yes, I'm ducking for cover under my desk, but I think I've only heard maybe 2 of his pieces that engaged with me at all. It's like if you drained all the life and energy out of Mozart, you're left with Haydn. That's quite funny. Like the first movement of his 39th Symphony. I don't remember that. So I'm going to resist the temptation to look up the 39th Symphony because there are other pieces to think about, but I can't remember how it goes. But Haydn, well, he did write 104 of them. I think the miracle of Haydn is that he manages not to be boring despite the sheer sort of unprecedented number of pieces he has to churn out, and he always remains lively and inventive. The thing is, anyone who's questioning Haydn's talent as a classical composer, check out other classical composers, like more bog standard ones like Stamitz. I mean, check out Stamitz's blooming symphony number, whatever this one is. Here, here's a bit of Stamitz. Now, I know back in the 18th century, I don't doubt that that was sort of thrilling because you're hearing an orchestra and he's intelligent enough to know how to calculate a sort of crescendo effect in the orchestra. But basically, you're just left with these slightly dreary classical tropes, it seems to me. Tremolando, you know, it's all a bit ordinary. With all due respect to Stamitz, and I'm sure, and some of you out there will tell me there are some masterpieces by Stamitz, perhaps there are, and the classical style is dependent on these funny little formulae, even in Mozart. But I do think a lot of classical composers just kind of wheeled out these tropes without doing anything interesting. Mozart always converts the dross of the classical style into gold. And to some extent, I'd say the same for Haydn, particularly in terms of formal, all sorts of just marvellously brilliant and witty and fabulously imaginative formal things and surprises that he throws at you. So that's my quick defence of Haydn. Someone said the trumpet concerto is pretty sick though, and it was in Squid Game. Yes, it was. I think it was the da 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 bum 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 bum, the beautiful finale, the famous rondo finale that they use in a very creepy way in Squid Game. But then Squid Game is creepy, isn't it? Pachelbel's Canon, yeah, well, that'll come up again in a minute. I'm going to leave that. Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra? No. I've never been a fan of this composer. Well, Bartok was an intelligent man and clearly realised that atonality was not the only way forward after Electra. But he couldn't seem to land on which alternative he wanted to holster. So instead he just threw in the kitchen sink. Well, I like the fact that this person is having this is someone called Puzzle-Headed Dirt. He's having a real go at analysing Bartok's journey. I mean, he's taken the trouble to think about it, which is great, but I think the Concerto for Orchestra is amazing. You can't diss Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra. It's an absolute categorical masterpiece. Mahler's First Symphony, I rather like it. It's full of songs. Do you know, I heard this when I was 10. The opening, I remember my parents put on a recording of the opening. It's modelled actually on the opening of Beethoven's Fourth, and you have this A, there are harmonics, it's completely mysterious, and it just sits there on this A, and then you get these sort of calls of fourths. There's something primal and as if nature itself is being evoked, and this an extraordinary dropping figure, a bit like Pachelbel's Canon, dropping into fourths, not like that in character though. And then you get these wonderful off-stage effects with trumpets, and the woodwind in the orchestra responding. Fabulous. It's like the beginning of music feeling like a kind of multi-dimensional thing where bits of sound are coming at you from all over the place, and it's at the same time simultaneously like being right out in the middle of the forest or something. You can hear these sounds that are very like bird song or animals sort of calling across the forest. Fantastic. It opens a new world in that piece. Mahler 1. Einaudi, yeah, I think I'd agree with that. Canon in D, which I presume they mean Pachelbel, should be permanently banned. I think that's a bit harsh, but it does get overdone. Jail Ward has put much of many composers, Mozart, Haydn, Tchaikovsky, Bruckner, Wagner, Beach, Bach perhaps, the greats weren't gods, they all had clunkers. One composer I'd be happy to never hear again is Boulez. Oh, Beach. I think Beach, sorry, it's me getting Amy Beach, of course. That's Amy Beach. Because someone else has come in with Bruckner and Beach are not greats. They're okays. I think all these composers are, well, what would I say? It's too general somehow, isn't it? When there's so much being created and so many marvellous things, it's actually, I would say, quite hard to find clunkers. I don't know where the clunkers are. Perhaps someone can tell me where the clunkers are. There are a few in Tchaikovsky. He's not always consistent. Love him though I do, but I think there are less good pieces. But he's brilliant, so his less good music is just ever so slightly less inspired. It's not that it's bad. Bruckner, Wagner. Wagner's unbelievably consistent. Bruckner, pretty fascinating always, isn't he? Amy Beach, it's a smaller output. The chamber pieces and songs and so forth are beautiful. Right, I cannot make it through an entire performance of Brahms' Piano Concerto No. 1 without dozing off. It's an odd piece to choose because I'd say Brahms 1 is pretty thrilling. It is long and it is quite heavy and intense. Sure you weren't listening to Liszt Sonata in B minor. Oh, I don't agree. I think Liszt Sonata in B minor, which I played myself for my finals recital, is surely one of the most thrilling pieces ever composed. Surely. Or maybe I should play a bit of the Liszt B minor sonata, really, since I can. You start with these. Isn't this the most amazing way to begin a sonata, with these weird scales? Absolutely compelling and mysterious. And then the second scale is even weirder. Sort of Hungarian thing with 2 augmented seconds in it, and it's so kind of dark and in a way terrifying. and then you have this Faustian main theme, and then you get this sort of Mephistophelian thing. Yeah, oh, it's fantastic. But and then all hell breaks loose. I ought to do a thing about Liszt Sonata. I love that piece. Not boring at all.